So, decisions. How do you make decisions? Last night, Kathy was out with her friends at a Bible study dinner, and so I took a walk. And somehow I ended up at an ice cream store. And there was a long line, and I stood in line and went to get the ice cream. But then there's all these decisions to make: one scoop, two scoops, three scoops. What do you do? And then there are all these different toppings. I didn't even know what half of them were. So I kind of panicked. I was almost paralyzed. So I just did the obvious. I chose three scoops, four toppings, just pointed to them and had the ice cream. So sometimes decisions are very difficult to make. Um, what about big decisions, such as your job, a job choice, or where to live? What do you do? Do you make checklists? Do you make a list of pros and cons? How do you know God's will? Would it not be really cool to have an app on your cell phone where you can just type in your problem and the app tells you what to do? I like Google Maps. I just want to know how to get somewhere, type it in, it tells me where to go and how to get there. Simple, easy. Wouldn't it be cool to have Alexa, to be able to say, Alexa, here's my problem. What do I do with a crazy wife? And she says, there's Alexa right now. Alexa, stop. Anyway, unfortunately, the Bible, Alexa starts talking to me. Unfortunately, the Bible, Alexa, stop. Alexa, stop. So, unfortunately, the Bible is not like her. And it's not a manual for living. It gives big categories. For example, Proverbs 1:7 says, make sure that you honor God. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. So put God first. And we know the big categories from the Bible. Put others before yourself. So life is not about me. There's even the Ten Commandments, but even they are not definitive. For example, the Ten Commandments say, honor your father and your mother. But what if your father is an alcoholic, he's abusive and a criminal? Do you obey him in certain circumstances? And what about the commandment that says don't lie? Don't bear false witness. Make sure that you're not manipulating the world according to your will through lying. But then, what if the classic example, I'm harboring a Jewish person in my house, a Nazi knocks on the door and says, are you harboring a Jewish person in your house? What do you do? So obviously, the Bible is not a perfect algorithm for dealing with all of the difficult, messy life situations and events that we face. Now, James tells us, we are in James chapter 3, verse 13. He's speaking about two kinds of wisdom, and he writes, who is wise and understanding among you? Who is wise? Well, let that person show it by their good life, deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. Good life. A good life is one that's done in humility, but lived in humility before God. The Hebrew word behind the Greek that James is writing in is tov, T-O-V. The big picture of tov goes right back to the beginning of the Bible, the big picture of goodness. What is good? The Bible starts with God creating the world, and he calls it tov. And then then there's sun and moon, tov. And then there are animals, tov. Nature, tov. God creates human beings, very tov. It's a picture of, in one way to interpret this, to understand this big teaching, is that God is giving us a picture of a society that is good. It's not perfect, but it's good. And where there is a relationship between nature and God and humanity, and it is all one. It's together like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a community that needs to stick together, and it only works with God in the middle of it. And so, again, it's not perfect. It was probably hard work. They were called to create a society. They were called to feed each other. You have to do agriculture and all of those things. So it was hard work, but it was good work. It was purposeful work. It was life giving. And there was love. It was a good world. But in the middle of that picture, there is God's first lesson for all of us, which is that living the good life, that goodness belongs to God. In the middle of the garden, Eden is a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of the knowledge of Tov and Ra, the knowledge of the differentiation between beneficial and not beneficial, good and bad, right and wrong. And God's teaching is, don't take that ability to do that upon yourselves. Don't take it on yourself to be able to think that you can make those discernments apart from me. You can't do this on your own. We are partners, and it must stay that way. So here's the story of how not to make decisions. There was a snake in the garden. That's the personification of wisdom, a false wisdom that exists in the world, an intelligence which seeks to take us away from God. Still exists, but it's there. A different kind of wisdom. And Eve looks at this tree, and she's, of course, influenced by this false wisdom. James calls it demonic in this chapter that I was just reading from. And Eve sees that it's good for wisdom. She wants it. She sees it's beautiful. And so she plucks it right off the tree. Now, don't blame Eve. What was Adam doing? He was down in the basement watching television while a snake was trying to seduce his wife. So he's worse. So she has taken it upon herself to define what is right and what is wrong instead of God. And she did what was right in her own eyes. And the result, as always, is whenever you take for yourself the claim to be wise in your own eyes, to redefine Tov, goodness, according to your standards, apart from God's, you'll always mess it up. No matter how well you know the Bible, you might know it from front to back, totally memorized. But behind all of that is you. You've got pride, selfish ambitions, envy, mixed motives. James lists all those things. Read it in James 3. In fact, most of us, unfortunately, already know what we want to do according to our standards, and then we use the Bible and everything else to try to justify what we've already decided. Maybe this has happened to you. You've got a big decision to make, and you're wondering what job, for example, you should take. You've used the checklists. All 15 things are checked off. You've looked at the pros and cons. The pros list is this long. The cons list is only this long. You've studied scripture. You've read the book, 15 Infallible Proofs on How to Know God's Will. Check them all off. But within you, there's just a little bit of an odd feeling that maybe I'm force-fitting something here, but you ignore it. and you make your decision, act on it, instead of ending up with tov, you end up with ra. And maybe it's like Adam and Eve did. That job just isn't making it for me anymore. Oh man, I'm making more money, but I just don't like it. It's thorns and thistles. And as far as my relationship with my wife is concerned, we were on the same page, but right now we're a little bit at each other, just like Adam and Eve. And now you look back and you think, if only I had listened to that thing in my gut, if only I had been more patient, if I hadn't felt maybe force fitting, if instead of falling into all of those decision making processes that I use, if only I had kept the big picture of God's goodness and God Himself in front of me. Even though it might have been harder, it would have been good. Have you ever had that happen to you? So James gives us a picture of what God's tov is, His goodness, and maybe a little bit of a picture that we can keep in front of us. He starts out with the word pure, gives a list, and at the end of the list, he uses the word sincere. How's he put it? Verse 17, the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Begins with pure, ends with sincere. It's good. It's whole. It's new. It's real. It's good. Sincere comes from the Latin word, comes from Latin. Sin means without. Seer means wax. Without wax. In the ancient Near East, pottery was a big deal. If a pot would break, they would put it back together, gluing it, so to speak, together with wax, and then paint it over so that this pot looks brand new. But in reality, there are cracks all through it. And so sincere becomes a word without wax, so a word that means it's pure. There's no brokenness through it. And so, are you as free as possible, as far as your understanding goes, from cracks in your character motivating a wrong decision? Are you honest enough with yourself about your motives? Or are you making rationalizations to get to do what you want to do? Are you willing? Are you willingness not to do that thing you want to do if it's God's will not to? And then peace loving. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions that are speaking a hard truth to somebody, but you do it out of love for the other person. You don't confront to make a point. You carefront for the best for the other person. That's tov. And considerate, James says, putting the other first, being sacrificial. Life is not about me. That list is worth pondering. So, in all of your decisions and life choices, ask, is the choice that I'm about to make, does it fit within God's picture of goodness? Is it tov? Is the decision good? Or have you plucked the decision making off the tree and defined for yourself what's good? Is the knowledge of good and evil still on the tree where it belongs? And are you walking in the cool of the evening breeze waiting for God so that you can have your daily walk with Him, so that you are in a constant relationship with God? Or are you sort of in your life, perhaps hiding when God comes looking for you and He can't find you, and you're hiding somewhere and covering yourselves up? Here's what I've discovered. Uh, it's there in walking with God. And I'll tell you, my walk with God is imperfect at its best. It's messy. And I live in the uncertainties of life and in the decisions of life. I often don't know what I'm doing. But when I look back, I've concluded that it's so often exactly at the time when I don't know what I'm doing that somehow in my life with God, that He is right there guiding, tweaking, directing, pulling me in His direction. And I'll look back and say, right at the time when I was least able to make decisions, I look back and say, wow, He carried me through. One time, I had been a teacher for 14 years, and I had become a Christian and decided I was going to become a pastor. Well, I thought in order to prove to God that I'm trustworthy, I decided I'm going to resign from teaching and go to seminary. So one morning, I came into the school office, turned in my resignation in the basket there, but I still had this confining feeling that maybe I was like force fitting something. But no, I was doing the faithful thing. Thank heavens, God had placed a friend with me named Carl, and he gently just reminded me that maybe you're pushing things, little Jeff. At the end of the day, I went, looked in that basket, found my resignation, took it out, and didn't resign. Instead, took a sabbatical, then came back for another year of teaching, and from then finished seminary and became a pastor. God's trustworthiness, God's goodness, God's tov, living with Him, walking with Him in the uncertainties of life is, in my view, in the Bible's view, and what James is saying, that's the wisdom of God that guides you through the twists and turns of life. When you have a decision in front of you, ask, is it good? Does it fit within the picture of God's goodness? Is it tov? God bless you, everybody. Have a great week as you live your life with God, making decisions in all of your uncertainties. Know that God, His goodness is there. God bless. Have a great week. Bye-bye.